That's why discussions like this are important, is that there is not one, like leaders are not born and leaders are not 100% made.
Yeah. Those are also skills that are good for a great leader. However, that doesn't make them a better leader.
Welcome back to our second part of our first leadership series, digging into the topic of whether leaders are born or made.
So now that we've really talked about the nurture versus nature and the buildup in our history and whether you're born with it or it's made to be a great leader, we're going to look at the personality traits. We're going to break it down between introverts and extroverts. And we're going to talk about both of them and put them in scenarios as we talked about before. And my hope is to show everyone or anyone that has doubts out there that you still can be a great leader. It's just that you have to get past the doubt. Okay. And so one of the things that we do know is that leaders, they have the ability to control their personality traits. So they can move back and forth. Like I like to look at it like that pendulum, like you have extroverts, like on one side, and you have your introvert on the other side. And to be a great leader, no one is, well, first of all, no one is one or fully the other. We kind of, as humans, we kind of swing like on a pendulum from one to the other, back and forth.
Yeah, now, based on the situation we might be in, or our comfort level, or
I think the biggest one is the comfort level, is finding the comfort level of the balance between how far you could swing or you exist in between the two. And the thing is that both of them, because of that, makes anyone, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, the possibilities of you being a great leader is there. Because as we've already learned, 2/3 of this ability is learned. It's made. We're either taught it or we learn it, or it's nurtured or to be built in us.
Yeah.
So that's how we know that it's possible for either to be a great leader. Now, you may be looking at, well, how does an introvert become a leader? Well, to be a great leader, if you're an introvert, most introverts are great listeners. They're great listeners. They're amazing observers. They're data processors. You know, they like to collect data, process it, and analyze it. They're very analytical. Those are skills that a great leader needs. And so in people's mind, you may think, well, I'm not quite like an extrovert or someone that you've seen that's bold and, you know, they're willing to put themselves out there. They're excited about being seen. They're good in social settings and they have great skills. And uniquely, those are also skills that are good for a great leader. However, that doesn't make them a better leader. And I think a lot of times, especially for the introvert, they are ones that find themselves on the part of that doubt, probably more so than an extrovert.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think using the example of listening, like an extrovert will listen, but an extrovert might not hear.
Right.
An introvert listens and also hears, but I think each one of those personality traits has some pluses and also has some risks.
Yeah.
Right. And I think also, you know, the fact that you bring up, you know, being outspoken or being bold. And when people who are introverts view these great leaders or learn about great leaders in history, or see great leaders, people who are touted as, you know, industry pioneers and, you know, tech giants and moguls of the industry, like they make assumptions that those traits are just natural for those individuals and that they weren't learned. When 90% of the time, chances are those were probably learned.
Yep.
You know, there's no way that Steve Jobs wanted to get up in front of thousands of people on a major stage when he first started out. Or Bill Gates. You know, I'm just using like two people who used to do those mega meetings. You know, like they may have had, you know, one of them may have been a little more comfortable trying it than the other.
Right.
But most of those traits, like from the outside looking in, a lot of assumptions can become made.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think just quickly before you move on, Ed, is, you know, we've talked about this a lot as we've researched this topic. And another reason we actually wanted to do this discussion and not really make it about a lesson, but we wanted people to listen so they could find a little bit of inspiration to get through the doubt, or a little bit of guidance on how to navigate if they find themselves feeling this way at whatever point in their career, even if they haven't gotten into leadership yet, is that when you're a new leader, or you are a struggling leader or an emerging leader, you often will mimic behaviors that you have observed or learned or think are what makes a person successful.
Yeah.
So, and that not all the time is necessarily the smartest thing to do. At all. You know, it's just because someone you perceive is successful is aloof and blunt and sometimes rude.
Right.
You should not be aloof, sometimes blunt and rude in order to be successful, because that might not make you a very good leader. And most likely doesn't.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because in the beginning of my career, you know, we've talked about this many times, how I was a manager of a checklist. I just was very direct. I was direct manager. And when I first became a leader, that was someone I was mimicking. I had found someone who actually came to me and asked me about going into management, and they were someone that was very direct and straight and loud and out there and an extrovert. And for me, I thought that was a manager or a leader. That was how you led people. And I mimicked that behavior. Now, that didn't work for me a few years later down the line, when I found out that it wasn't effective. And I found out, you know, as we've said before, it wasn't about me. It was about the teams that I was leading. So to your example, yes, we tend to, that's the easiest way for us to process how to be a manager. For us, Carrie, we didn't have people that were doing things like what we're doing today. For leaders that were out there. We just had what we saw in the present moment. And that was how we learned to be leaders.
I was a very different leader. Right. And that was probably a frustration for several of my direct supervisors. But, you know, I think that's why discussions like this are important, is that there is not one, like, leaders are not born and leaders are not 100% made.
Yeah.
And being a successful leader in one industry with certain behaviors does not always translate to another industry.
Right.
Well, but at the same time, it does require self-awareness as well as an understanding of the people that you're trying to lead. And, you know, that I think is, you know, the introvert versus extrovert part of this discussion is highly valuable, because, you know, the extrovert often is more concerned about what other people see.
Right. Exactly.
And they don't take the time to think about what the other person might be thinking or feeling. But at the same time, they also are moving so fast that they don't realize what they're doing might not be a good leadership skill.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Whereas the introvert might spend so much time looking inside, looking back at themselves, that they may be perceived as a non-participatory leader, or someone who is aloof, or someone, someone who's not part of the team, or I just can't make a good connection with that person. So it's a really good discussion. So I'm excited about these scenarios.
Yeah. So let's, that's a great lead up to the scenarios. Let's just jump right into it. So the very first scenario that we're going to talk about is people. And we're going to look at the people aspect from an internal and external situation. What we do know is that with extroverts, let's just take those for example. They tend to be more of a social butterfly. So for them, because of the personality that they have, they find pleasure when it comes to people situations. So they tend to be someone that will never meet a stranger. And they see clients or customers or just individuals on your teams as potential true friends. You know what I mean? And so they're also someone who enjoys working in a group. They love group settings. They feed off of the energy of other people and interacting and being with people.
Yep.
The key part as an extrovert is, however, they have to figure out, it's important that they understand how to tap into their ability to listen and quickly observe. With the extrovert, as you said earlier, they are listeners and hearers simultaneously. They everything is on a quick moment, but they have to have the ability to really listen and observe, especially the audience that they're in. And, they have to make sure that they don't miss those important signals when especially when they find themselves in a difficult situation.
Yeah.
That's very, very key. When it comes to an introvert leader, on the other hand, they're someone who they are able to communicate, but they like to they'd rather communicate with people that they know. They're much comfortable with someone that they know, and they like to keep the conversation as short as possible. They're very in and out kind of people. Yes. You know what I mean? And although the introvert, they may sometimes feel that interacting with others can be draining. So it's a complete opposite of the extrovert, where the extrovert is excited and they feed off of the energy. The introvert is someone that might not necessarily feel as comfortable in that setting. Bless you. And they find it draining. But because they are great listeners and they are analytical, they're able to process the data quicker to get them in and out of a situation. Now, the issue is that sometimes as an introvert, we tend to find ourselves in and out of a situation and not being empathetic to the other person. And so that's one of the things that you have to pay attention to as an introvert, is that it's important that you pay attention to the tone and the body language when you're interacting with other people.
Yeah, like I think with an extrovert, when an extrovert is in a people situation, whether it's like coworkers or in a meeting, or whether it's dealing with a client group, an extrovert will be listen like this. Yeah. Yep. I hear what you're saying. Yep. So anyway, and then move on. And miss a lot of those cues, or understand that, you don't need to fill silence.
Right.
Sometimes you can just let the silence be there. I was once kicked under a table by one of my favorite bosses in the world. I still remember, being kicked and passed a note that said, "Say less, mean more." And that is a lesson that, that truly resonated with me. because an extrovert can misinterpret their participation in a conversation as being kind of the host of the conversation, when a conversation is two-way, and you have to be aware of that. However, introverts, and I've worked and led many introverts, are in and out of that conversation so fast that the other person doesn't know everything that's going on inside their head. And that part is never shared. With an extrovert, it's like you wear everything like, a coat of armor. Like everybody knows what's going on in your head because you're telling them. But as an introvert, you often answer so quickly and bluntly and go right to the solution that you leave the other person maybe misinterpreting you, or like feeling not valued because you want to leave the conversation fast. So, I think it's really good to kind of just have that level of understanding that, it doesn't matter if you're an introvert or an extrovert, but you do have to understand, like you said, you got to know your audience, you got to read the room, but you should also understand that like both sides do want to get something out of the conversation.
Exactly. Exactly. So then the next scenario that we're going to look at is being seen and being heard in team settings. And this is more of that participation part, and that getting volunteered and being upfront with it. With an extrovert, when it comes to participation and everything, they're willing to participate in any and everything. Some of that is to be seen. Some of it is just because they have that innate feeling where they need to be a part of something, and they perform better when they're a part of something in a group or whatever. So they will participate, going forward, right? Like in the beginning. So they, and sometimes they'll end up on, and the thing is you have to be very careful, because sometimes as an extrovert, you will end up in a situation or on a committee of something that may not be right for you, or may not fall in line with everything else that you are on the committee with. You kind of end up with that extra stuff that, you will probably get done because you are that extrovert, but did you really need it? Did it really take you away from something else that you really, really are good at and perform at and can be your best? Did this slow you down? And I think a lot of extroverts, they find themselves in that trap. But it's really hard for extroverts
not to participate or volunteer. And it fills their days and their weeks very, very quickly. And by overcommitting like that, you do run the risk of sacrificing something else very important, or stretching yourself so thin that you do a half-assed job at 10 things instead of doing 5 things well.
Right. Exactly. And the interesting thing is when you look at the introvert is probably the one that they're more than likely to sit back and wait and let all the assignments pass them until they're either forced or they're left with no choice but to take whatever's left over. They end up with something, and that becomes a problem for the introvert because they may end up on something that, once again, is not in their wheelhouse, which then makes them become more involved in something that may pull them away from something that they're good at. So this is where I like to say, this is that pendulum part where you have to find, if you're the introvert, how far can you swing to that extrovert side to where you're able to recognize something that's being assigned or something that you can participate in that you're good at and say, oh, I will do that. and raise your hands and be a part of it or jump onto that, as opposed to being forced to take something that you're not good at.
Yeah, I think also looking at this in terms of being a leader of a team.
Exactly.
It's also worth noting that, you know, you should understand how your team is made up of extroverts and introverts, particularly if you're going to be dividing up workload or projects, or you're going to be asking for volunteers, or you expect participation. You need to structure it so everyone can participate.
Right.
You need to have a way for everyone to participate, because you run the risk of either excluding an introvert for, you know, and overhyping an introvert. And that's not good for a team mentality.
Right. Exactly.
So just something to be mindful of out there.
Yeah. And then there is daily scheduling and how an introvert versus an introvert goes into scheduling their day. This is also something that, to your point, your last point, Carrie, that you were making, that it's very important that as a leader, you understand how your team is made up and how they like to schedule or plan out their days. Prime example with an extrovert, they're more of someone that would rather meet in a group setting. They're able to jump into a group setting and start their day off running. They enjoy the brainstorming process in a collective group because they like that ability to feed off of others. So being able, as someone that's leading an extrovert, being able to give them the ability to schedule some time for them to engage with others is very important.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, I think for me, like, I have to schedule things. Yeah. But at the same time, like, I like to make sure people know what my schedule is. So as an extrovert, I tend to broadcast a lot. Yeah. And, you know, to an introvert who may or may not care what my day looks like, you know, that can sometimes be a lot. But I think also being able to understand how your team gets into their day or how they like to schedule their day is really important, because even though it's important for me to start my day a certain way, it might not work for half of my team because that's not how they like to start their day.
You know, and
organize their day.
Example is, look at the introvert. The introvert tends to like to sort and plan alone. They tend to like to maybe start early and come in and gather data, process, collect data and information before jumping into a group. And like you said, as a leader, it's important that you understand that you have introverts that may have to come in and they're not ready to jump right into a group setting at the beginning of their shift or their morning when they come in. They want to sit and analyze and plan their day out alone, and strategically, probably throughout the day, want to go out and reassess and, you know, reprocess and things like that. And it's important as a leader that you allow them what's called their alone time. You know, I was lucky enough, because I am an introvert.
Which I really, truly did not know until we started this endeavor. And I've known him for close to 20 years. He is a learned extrovert, everyone. Y'all, he knows he became a learned extrovert.
That's exactly, it's so true. I totally did. And that's where I learned how to use that pendulum to swing back and forth. But me being, especially when it came to scheduling my time and doing time, I was someone that liked to do that alone. And luckily for me, I was able to have most of my leaders, almost all of them, understood and respect that. But it was also because me as an extrovert, I was able to explain to them why it worked that way for me. You know what I mean? So that was that was the best part, is having those leaders. And then I was able to identify those on the people that I led, who was an extrovert, who was an introvert, and how they wanted to process their day throughout the day.
Thank you all for watching all the way through. Stay tuned for the last part of our leadership series on whether leaders are born or made. The last 2 scenarios, as well as our wrap-up, are included in the 3rd part.